Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me as we continue to dive deep into Paizo's Strength of Thousands adventure path. In this video, we'll be looking at the third chapter of Kindled Magic, the first book of the campaign. As with most of my other Strength of Thousands videos, there will likely be spoilers for both Book 1 and for future events in the adventure path. So if you're a player in this game, you may want to duck out here. Before we get into an overview of the dungeon that makes up most of Chapter 3, I wanted to start with the topic that I've seen a fair bit of discussion around online, and one that I personally ran into with my table as well. And that is the feeling that the teachers of the Magaambya are either irresponsible or potentially incompetent, given the pretty serious events that take place at the end of Chapter 2 and throughout Chapter 3. Students are going missing and dying, insects are swarming through underground tunnels and destroying campus buildings, and the teachers are sending low-level students to help solve these issues. My players actually mentioned this multiple times throughout the campaign, and sometimes in character to the teachers' faces, at how inept the staff of this school must be to let such things happen to the student body. Now, there's a few different ways to address this if it comes up at your table. The first is starting by just acknowledging, out of character, that yeah, it's probably a little bit unrealistic, but it's also a common trope in fiction where protagonists are students, and it's going to be part of this story too. We're trying to tell an exciting tale where students are the heroes, and if the teachers swooped in to save the day every time, well, that wouldn't be very dramatic. I found that sometimes, rather than trying to develop a complex ironclad in-world rationale, just letting the players know that you're all in on the joke, but it's part of the story, is going to help diffuse some of that tension and helps you all just move on in the narrative in the same direction. That said, you also want to at least provide some plausible reasons the players can latch onto for why their characters are in this situation. The main reason that the book offers is that the teachers and the senior students are investigating what they think are more dangerous areas, and they're asking the newly minted attendants to map less risky locations to speed up the mapping process. This is a common strategy that's used in a lot of lower-level RPG adventures. It's not that the more powerful NPCs can't help, but it's that they're busy with other plans or other threats, leaving the PCs to their own devices. To reinforce this, when you begin Chapter 3, I suggest calling out how the atmosphere of the school has really changed since the attack on the Tireless Hall. Teachers are escorting groups of students between classes, they're establishing command centers in each one of the major campus buildings, and they're helping to coordinate shipments of antivenom or mining supplies as the different groups clear out smaller tunnels. This shows how not only are the Magaambya staff able to spring into action in a crisis, but underscores the seriousness to which they take a risk to the student body and can make the PCs feel a little more confident with their teachers. In my campaign, prior to the players descending into the infested tunnels, I also added a brief skill challenge using the victory point rules to help show them what was happening in the campus around them. I described how in the days following the attack, each branch marshaled their members to help the school, and different individuals were volunteering for activities related to their branch's strengths. Cascade bearers started placing protective runes around potential tunnels or burrows, and students in that branch could spend some time volunteering and make an arcane or primal check against a DC 17 to successfully create a warding spell. Emerald Bows were being asked to help organize the response from Nentambu, working with shopkeepers and chime ringers as runners. Students who volunteered to help with that were able to make a DC 15 diplomacy check to coordinate some of those efforts. I also used this as an opportunity to drop some clues that the chime ringers were reporting they were understaffed and unable to provide much support, which foreshadows some of the events that happen in Book 2. If the PCs are successful in this skill challenge, you can award some additional supplies in the first room of the dungeon, as well as give them bonuses on recall knowledge checks, describing how the well-coordinated efforts provided some additional scouting reports from other groups of students that they were able to remember, and which might align with some of the things that they encounter in their own travels. Regardless, after a few days of this heightened security, you can have Teacher Ott and Teacher Ulawa approach the students and ask for their help in that more direct way, starting their journey into the infested caverns. Chapter 3 is about as straightforward a dungeon crawl as it comes. There are multiple paths, several mini-bosses and lieutenant monsters, alongside a few non-combat challenges, And there are also a number of wandering monsters who are helped out by a series of secret passages and doors which circle around the tunnels. I'm not going to go too far in detail room by room in this video. If you're interested in the way I analyze and run pre-written adventures and dungeons in a more narrative way, check out my video on breaking down the first 4 rooms of the Pathfinder Beginner's Box for some insights in how I do that more tactically. Instead, I'm going to focus on a few of the key elements to remember as your party navigates through the depths of the dungeon. Number 1. This dungeon is built to encourage stealth. Most pre-written adventures have general features for each one of their dungeons. These are sections that talk about things like the height of ceilings, material the walls are made out of, or whether doors are commonly locked or open as the party navigates. This information is great for GMs to identify the tone of each dungeon. In the features section of this chapter, it mentions that the constant droning hum gives creatures a +2 circumstance bonus on stealth checks, and that secret doors and tunnels throughout the tunnels mean that both players and NPCs have plenty of options to move around hidden. There are also several encounters where monsters are described as sleeping or exhausted, or they're distracted, even in one situation having a -4 perception check on their initiative to account for this. Look for ways to communicate this to your players as they proceed, both outright telling them that they get a stealth circumstance bonus from the droning, as well as something like narrating that a pack of gremlins scurries down a path in front of them but are oblivious to their presence, can reinforce and inform their behavior. It helps communicate to them this is a dangerous place, there are a lot of enemies around here, but with some care, you can probably move around and avoid or get the drop on many of them if that's the strategy that you want to take. It's also a strategy that more closely aligns with what the Magaambya's ethos is, rather than moving room to room killing gremlins as you might in a more traditional dungeon crawl. Number 2. Figure out in advance how you want to deal with friendly NPCs. Between the encounter with Ignacy, the encounter with Bingy, and any other gremlins who might surrender to the PCs, they may assemble quite the menagerie before the end of the dungeon. If your players end up taking a stealthy approach, like I described earlier, that can then put a wrench into their plans if suddenly they're traveling with a group of 10. Having NPCs offer up front to hide and wait for the PCs to come back, or stating that they're confident that they can make it to the surface if that's what the PCs want, give the players an out where they can continue with a stealthy approach without feeling like they're being guilted into taking an escort mission as they advance through the dungeon. Number 3. Prepping for Stone Ghost. Stone Ghost is a really fun final boss. He has flavorful abilities and they do interesting things. But between his spells, his 2-action Entombing Grasp ability, being slowed 1 when he starts out his turn in a wall based on his Stone Spirit ability, he's going to be really tight on action economy, and you may struggle to figure out how he's going to spend his very limited resources. Much like I'd encourage players to do when they start playing a new character in class, do yourself a favor and chart out a few sample turns. Some turns where Stone Ghost might need to move, some where he doesn't need to spend an action to stride, and some where he starts his turn in a wall, so he's only going to get 2 actions that entire turn. Here's a few examples to get you started, but having a game plan will help make the fight more memorable than a series of strikes and strides, and it'll also speed it up for you at the table. With the infested caverns mapped and cleared, and Stone Ghost's leadership of the gremlins ended, causing them to scatter back off into the jungles, the PCs can take a much-deserved victory lap, having ended the immediate threat to the Magaambya. The next day, they report their findings to teachers Ulawa and Ott, a moment of reflection on all of the mysteries that they recently solved, that quickly ends when the new and naughty students arrive and are summarily attacked by griffins in what is an extreme encounter for the player characters if they're still level 3. Going back to the beginning of this video, this is another good opportunity to show how capable the teachers of the Magaambya can be. Teacher Ott should absolutely be throwing high-level heals or other protective magics on the sidelines and supporting the PCs during this encounter, declaring that no more students, prospective or not, will be lost on his watch. Having the griffins fly away at low HP also helps reduce the potential chance that a player or an Anati will die, which would be a pretty bitter pill to swallow so soon after the players had great success in the tunnels, stealing some of the enjoyment that they might have just received from their victory. And as this encounter wraps up, it brings us to the end of Book 1 and kicks off some of the events of what I think are one of the more challenging parts of the AP to prepare for, the sandbox adventures of Book 2, spoken on the Songwind. Join me next time to discuss how to manage some of the timelines of these parallel mysteries which are laced together during that part of the campaign. But until then, thanks for joining me, and as always, take care.